This channel started as an idea, and now it's becoming something more. You're part of that story now. Subscribe, and let's see where it goes.
The message came at 6:47 inches the morning while I was still in my housecoat, pouring my first cup of coffee. I had slept badly the night before, the way I always do when something in my chest knows what my mind hasn't accepted yet. The phone buzzed against the counter and I picked it up without thinking, the way you do when you've spent 40 years being someone people call when things go wrong. It was my son. "Hey, Mom, just so you know, we've decided to keep Lily's birthday this Saturday kind of small. Just us and Rebecca's family. We know you've already done so much. We didn't want to burden you. You understand." I read it once, then again, then a third time. The way you reread something when the words make sense individually but refuse to make sense together. Just us and Rebecca's family. I set the mug down slowly. Coffee sloshed over the rim and pooled on the counter I had wiped clean an hour ago, but I didn't move to blot it. I stood there in the gray morning light of my kitchen in Augusta, Georgia, and I thought about the pink streamers I had bought 3 weeks ago. They were still in the bag on the floor of the hall closet, right beside the box of golden letter balloons that spelled out "Lily turns 5. Right beside the tablecloths, the party favors, the custom banner I had ordered from a woman at church who did calligraphy by hand. Right beside the $600 deposit I had already paid to the party venue my son had asked me to book. I had offered to plan the whole thing back in September. My son had called me, not Rebecca, not a group chat, but me directly, the way he used to call me about everything before he got married. He said, "Mom, you know how Lily loves princesses. You always do the best parties. Would you handle it?" And I had said yes before he finished the sentence, the way I always said yes, the way mothers do when they've been waiting to be needed. I spent 6 weeks on that party. I made a spreadsheet. I called 3 venues before I found one that had a real princess character who would arrive in a carriage. I ordered a custom cake with Lily's face on it, hand-painted by a baker 2 towns over. I bought enough pink and gold everything to decorate a small ballroom. I paid for all of it out of my own account, the one I had been building since I retired from 27 years of teaching 5th grade, the one I kept for what I called the good things. My son knew every bit of this. I had sent him photos. He had responded with heart emojis. And now, on a Thursday morning 6 days before the party, he was texting me that it was going to be small. Just them, just Rebecca's family, and me understanding. I didn't reply. I placed the phone face down on the counter, the same way you place something fragile when you're not sure how hard your hands are shaking. The thing about my daughter-in-law is that she has never once raised her voice at me. That's what makes it so difficult to explain to people. There are no dramatic scenes, no slam doors, no confrontations I can point to. There is only the slow, practiced art of being moved to the edges. A smile that stops just before it reaches the eyes. A conversation that turns away from you mid-sentence. An invitation that comes 3 days after everyone else's. She had a way of making me feel like a guest in rooms I had helped build. And she did it so graciously that I spent years wondering if I was imagining it. I was not imagining it. I had learned that slowly, the way you learn things you don't want to know. It started with the holidays. The first Thanksgiving after they married, Rebecca hosted at her mother's house and told my son they were keeping it intimate. He mentioned this to me the day before. I smiled and said of course, and drove over to my neighbor Helen's house with a sweet potato pie and ate at her table instead of mine. The second year, same thing. By the third year, I stopped expecting to be included and told myself that was just how modern families worked, that I was being flexible, that this was what good mothers did. Then there was the matter of the money. 14 months ago, my son called me. He and Rebecca were behind on the mortgage. Not a little behind. 4 months behind. The kind of behind where letters arrive in envelopes that don't look like letters. He was embarrassed. He was quiet in the way men get when they've had to ask their mother for something. I didn't make him say it twice. I transferred $800 that afternoon and told him not to worry about paying it back until things leveled out. Things leveled out, mostly. But they called again in the spring. This time it was the car payment and a medical bill Rebecca had overlooked. Another $2,100. Then in July, my son texted asking if I could cover Lily's preschool tuition for the fall semester while they sorted some things out. $1,400. I paid it all, not because I kept score, but because he was my son and she was my granddaughter, and that's what love looked like, I thought. That's what family meant. I had given them $7,300 in 14 months, and not one of those checks had come with a single condition. And now he was texting me. The Thursday before the party, I had spent 6 weeks and $600 planning to let me know it was going to be small. Just them. Just Rebecca's family. I picked the phone back up, and I did something I had never done before. Instead of replying, I opened my calendar. I scrolled back through the past year and a half. I looked at every birthday, every holiday, every school event. I counted how many I had been invited to last minute, how many I had watched on Instagram the day after, how many times I had been told the kids were tired, or Rebecca wasn't feeling well, or it was just going to be a small thing. Then I opened my banking app, and I looked at every transfer, every tuition payment, every mortgage assist. I sat with both things at the same time, the calendar and the account history, and I let myself see what I had been too gracious to see before. I was funding a family that had quietly, methodically decided I was not part of it. Not because they forgot me. People forget things by accident. They had not forgotten me. They had organized their lives with full knowledge of where I stood, and they had placed me outside the door every single time while making sure the lights stayed on from money I had handed through the mail slot. I did not cry. I want to be honest about that, because people expect women my age to cry when we are hurt. Instead, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Something cool and clear, like the first breath after a fever breaks. I opened a new tab in my banking app. I navigated to the automatic payment I had set up 3 months ago at my son's request. A recurring monthly transfer of $850 to help cover the difference on their mortgage refinance while the new rate settled in. I had been sending it quietly, without fanfare, every first of the month. I hovered over the cancel button. Not yet. I wasn't ready to be rash. I was 67 years old, and I had learned that decisions made in the first hour of pain are not always the decisions you can live with. So I closed the app. I got dressed. I drove to the party venue and I sat in the parking lot for a long moment before walking inside. The coordinator, a young woman named Priya, who had been wonderfully patient with all my questions for 6 weeks, greeted me at the desk with a smile. I told her calmly that I needed to discuss the booking. I told her there had been a change in plans. She pulled up the reservation. I leaned forward and looked at the name on the account. Mine. I was the sole account holder. The deposit, the remaining balance due Friday, the custom decor package, all of it was in my name because my son had asked me to handle it, and I had handled it completely, the way I handled everything I was asked to do. I thanked Priya. I asked her about their cancellation policy. I told her I would be in touch by end of day, and I drove home with the windows down and the radio off. Back at my house, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time. The pink streamers were still in the closet down the hall. I could hear them somehow, the way you can hear a thing that has been waiting to be used. I thought about my granddaughter, sweet Lily, who called me Grandma Dot, who had once fallen asleep in my arms, watching a cartoon about a princess who turned pumpkins into carriages, who had told me last Christmas that I smelled like cookies, which is the finest compliment a 5-year-old can give. I loved her without complication, the way you love a child who has never done anything to you, but exists wonderfully in the world. This was not about Lily. This was about what Lily would learn if I kept showing up to be invisible. What she would grow up believing love looked like, when the person who funded everything was never in the room where it happened, I picked up the phone. I did not call my son. I called Priya at the venue, and I told her I needed to cancel and redirect the booking. Then I opened my notes app, and I started a new list. The name at the top was Helen, my neighbor, a retired postal worker who had eaten Thanksgiving with me for 3 years, running because her own children were scattered across the country and never seemed to land anywhere near Georgia. Below her, I wrote Gloria, who had taught with me for 18 years and whose husband had passed in February, and who had mentioned once that she had never been to the Outer Banks and always wondered what the fuss was. Then Ruth, from my church's widows group, who walked with a slight limp and laughed louder than anyone I'd ever met. Then Constance, my college roommate, who lived alone in a condo in Macon and called me every Sunday just to talk about nothing important. Then Pearl, who was 81 and sharp as a tack, and had told me once, sitting in the church hall over paper cups of lemonade, that the last time anyone had taken her somewhere beautiful was 1,987. 6 names. 6 women who had loved quietly and been quietly forgotten. I redirected the venue deposit to a personal travel credit, and I got on the phone with a rental company I had found online 3 years ago, back when I had briefly considered planning a girls' trip before life got in the way, and I put someone else's needs first again. I did not tell my son what I had done. I did not reply to his Thursday morning text until Friday evening, when I sent a single message. "Sounds good. I hope Lily has a beautiful day." He responded with a thumbs-up emoji. That same evening, I navigated back to my banking app. I looked at the automatic transfer one more time. $850, set to go out the following Monday, the first of the month, the same as always. I canceled it. No message, no explanation, no warning. The same way I had received no explanation about why my granddaughter's birthday party had been quietly handed to someone else after I had spent 6 weeks building it. I slept better that night than I had in months. Saturday came and went. I did not drive by. I did not check social media. I had learned the hard way that watching other people enjoy things that were supposed to include you is a specific kind of pain that serves no purpose. So I spent the day doing something else entirely. I drove to Helen's house with a bottle of sweet tea and a legal pad, and I asked her if she had ever heard of Ocracoke Island. She had not. I told her about the wild horses that lived on the beach there, descended from Spanish Mustangs that had survived a shipwreck 400 years ago and made the island their own. I told her about the painted shutters on the little houses and the ferry ride through the Sound. I told her about the lighthouse, white and clean against the sky. Helen looked at me over the rim of her glass. "You're planning something," she said. "I am," I told her. She said, "Does it involve me?" "It does," I said. She didn't ask any other questions. She just smiled, the way women smile when they've been waiting for someone to choose them. Over the next 2 weeks, I made the other 5 calls. Each one was the same in the essential way. A hello that started cautious, because women our age have learned to be cautious when someone sounds too generous. A silence when I told them where I was thinking of going. Then a question that was really a wish, dressed up as a question. "Are you serious?" And me saying, "Pearl, I have never been more serious in my life." I booked a cottage on Ocracoke for 7 nights. Large enough for 6, with a porch that faced the water and a kitchen big enough for all of us to cook together. I called the ferry company and arranged transportation. I researched the wild horse tours and found a guide who had been leading them for 30 years and spoke about the horses the way people speak about family. I ordered a cake from a bakery in the town, chocolate with cream cheese frosting, because Ruth had once mentioned in passing that it was her favorite and no one ever made it for her anymore. My son called on the 9th, not to ask how I was doing. The first thing he said was, "Mom, I think there might be a problem with the account." I let a beat pass. Then I said, "What account?" He said, The one you've been sending from. We didn't get the transfer this month, I said. Oh, he said. Did something happen? Did you forget to set it up? I want you to understand what was in his voice. It was not concern. It was not the voice of a son who had been thinking of his mother and was calling to check on her. It was the voice of a man who had just discovered a machine he relied on was no longer running and wanted to know when it would be fixed. I said, "No, I didn't forget." A long pause. Then, "So what's going on?" I thought about everything I could say. I thought about the 6 weeks of planning and the pink streamers in the closet. I thought about $7,300 spread across 14 months. I thought about the Instagram photos I had never been in. I thought about Lily calling me Grandma Dot and not knowing that her birthday party had been handed to strangers while I sat in a parking lot wondering what I had done wrong. Then I thought about what Gloria had said to me last Sunday when I called to tell her about the trip. She had gone quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Dorothy, you know what I've missed most? Being somewhere beautiful, and not being the one who drove myself there." I said to my son, "I've decided to redirect some funds toward other things right now. I'm sure you'll manage." He said, "What other things?" I said, "I'm taking some friends on a trip." Another pause, longer this time. A trip? When was this planned? I almost laughed. When was this planned? As if my time, my savings, my right to spend my own retirement on something that filled me with joy rather than obligation required his scheduling approval. I said, "I'll talk to you when I get back." He said, "Mom, we're behind on," I said gently, the way I had said hard things to children for 27 years in a classroom. "I know. You'll figure it out. You're capable people." And I ended the call. Rebecca called an hour later. I did not answer. My son called again that evening. I did not answer. I went to bed early and I slept with the window open and the sound of the neighborhood settling into quiet, and I thought about Ocracoke and the horses that no one owned, that had survived shipwrecks and centuries and every storm that had ever blown through that coast, and were still there, still wild, still themselves. The week before the trip, I went to my closet and I pulled out a pair of linen pants I had bought 2 summers ago and never worn, because I kept thinking I'd wear them somewhere nice when the time was right. I packed them first, then 2 dresses I loved, sandals, a hat with a wide brim that my sister had given me for my birthday and that I had been saving for an occasion worthy of it. In the front pocket of my suitcase, I placed a photograph. It was of my late husband, Bernard, taken on a fishing trip to the Carolina coast back in 1989, the year before we had our son. He was squinting into the sun, one hand shading his eyes, his other arm relaxed at his side, and he was smiling the way he only smiled outdoors, loose and genuine. The city washed off him. He had always said salt air made a person honest. He had always said the ocean had no interest in your pretending. I had never brought him back to the coast after that trip. Life had other plans, and then he was gone. And then I had spent the next 20 years making sure everyone else's life had what it needed. I wrapped the photo in a soft cloth and tucked it carefully into the bag. We drove to the ferry together in 2 cars, 6 women ranging in age from 61 to 81, with enough luggage and enough laughter to fill both vehicles twice over. Pearl brought an enormous sun hat that she wore the entire ferry ride, even though it was barely May. Ruth brought a card game. She insisted she would teach everyone, and then proceeded to make up new rules every hand. Helen sat beside me on the upper deck and watched the water and didn't say much, and I could tell she was storing it up, the way some people store beautiful things inside themselves, because they haven't had enough of them. The cottage sat on a narrow road, 2 blocks from the beach. It was white, with green shutters and a porch that ran the full length of the front, and it smelled like cedar and salt and the particular sweetness of a house that had been loved by many people passing through. We stood in the front yard with our bags and just looked at it for a moment. Gloria said, "Dorothy, Dorothy, this is real. I said, It's real. She put her arm through mine and we walked inside. That first evening, while Ruth dealt cards, she was already changing the rules too, and Helen refilled glasses with the good lemonade she had insisted on making from scratch. I set Bernard's photograph on the mantel above the fireplace in the sitting room. I didn't make a ceremony of it. I just placed it where the light fell soft in the evenings, where he could see the room and the women in it, and know that the coast had finally gotten us back. No one asked me who he was. They all knew. They just nodded at him the way women nod at the beloved dead, with recognition and without pity. We ate together at the long table every night. We talked about the things women talk about when there's no one to perform for. Old arguments with people who were gone now, and whether we had been right or merely stubborn. Children we had given everything to, and what we would do differently. The small treasons of our bodies, the surprising pleasures of no longer caring about certain things, the grief that sits quiet in the corners of a life well lived and doesn't announce itself, just rests there, familiar. On the third day we did the horse tour. We rode in an open vehicle down the beach, through the dunes, to the north end of the island where the marsh opened into flats of pale grass and shallow water. And then the guide stopped and pointed, and there they were, 5 horses standing in the shallows, their dark legs half submerged, heads down, completely unbothered by our presence. One of them, a gray mare with a long mane gone to tangles, lifted her head and looked at us with dark and ancient eyes. Pearl reached over and grabbed my hand. She didn't say anything, neither did I. On the 5th night, after dinner, I brought out the candles. 1 for each of us. I lit mine first, from a long match, and I held it in front of me. The others followed. I said, I want to say something. They were quiet. I said, I spent a long time thinking that love meant making myself small so other people could feel big. I paid for things and planned things and stepped back from things, and I told myself that was generosity. But I've been thinking about it this week, and I think sometimes it wasn't generosity. Sometimes it was just fear. Fear that if I stopped making myself useful, I'd stop being wanted at all. I looked at the flame in my hand. Asterisk. The thing is, the people who only want you for your usefulness will drop you the moment they find someone more convenient. But the people in this room, times I looked at each of them, at Helen's quiet steadiness, and Gloria's laughing eyes, and Ruth with her card game rules, and Constance, who had driven 4 hours without a single complaint, and Pearl in her enormous sun hat, and Pearl's friend Dottie, who had come at the last minute, when I realized the cottage had a 7th bed, and it seemed wrong to leave it empty. You are the people who showed up for me when I wasn't being useful to anyone, when I called you just to call you, when I needed a plate of food brought over and I didn't want to ask, when Bernard died and the world went gray, and you sat with me in it. So this is for you. This whole week is for you. Because someone should have done it sooner, and I'm sorry it took me this long. Constance was crying quietly into her napkin. Ruth was doing the thing she always did when she was moved, which was to pretend she had something in her eye and look up at the ceiling. Gloria raised her glass and said, "To Dorothy." Everyone repeated it. I said, "No, to us, to the ones who keep going." We walked to the beach after that, barefoot in the dark, the sand still warm from the day. The stars were extraordinary, the kind of sky you forget exists when you live too long near city lights. We stood at the edge of the water, 6 women in a line, and let the Atlantic come to our ankles. Helen said softly, "I haven't felt this in years." I asked what she meant. She said, "Like I'm allowed to just be here, not helping anyone, not waiting to be needed, just here." I thought about my son, somewhere back in Augusta, working out his mortgage on his own for the first time in over a year. I thought about my granddaughter, who did not know that her grandmother had built her a party she'd never see, and who would grow up and one day maybe understand the things her parents had decided her grandmother was worth. I didn't feel anger about it. Not anymore. I felt something cleaner than that. I felt like myself. The email from my son arrived 2 days after I returned home. I opened it at my desk in the quiet of a Tuesday morning, the same desk where I had first read his text about the birthday party, which felt like a different lifetime now. He wrote that he knew things had been complicated. He wrote that Rebecca had been under a lot of stress and probably hadn't communicated well. He wrote that the kids missed me, which was almost certainly true and had nothing to do with what he was building toward. Then he wrote that the mortgage payment was due and they were short, and he was wondering, since I had clearly had money available for a vacation, whether I could reconsider the monthly transfer, at least for a few months, while they got back on track. He signed it, "Love, your son." I read it twice. I noticed what was not in it. No acknowledgement of the party planning I had done and been cut out of, no mention of the deposit I had lost when I canceled, no question about where I had gone or who I had gone with or whether I had enjoyed myself. No, "How are you, Mom?" Just the same hand extended for the same thing it had always wanted, wearing the costume of a family letter. I closed the laptop. I went to the kitchen and made coffee. I looked out the window at the bird feeder Bernard had built from a pine board, and 2 coffee cans in the winter of 2003. A cardinal was working at it, red as a flag, absolutely serious about its work. I thought about Pearl on the ferry, her hat enormous against the sky, her eyes wide and light. I thought about what Gloria had said on the last morning, standing in the driveway with her bag, before she drove home to Macon. She had hugged me for a long time and then pulled back and looked at me and said, "You know what you did? You decided your life was worth living for yourself. A lot of women never do that. Some of us never figure it out in time." I thought about what I would write back to my son. Then I thought about what I would not write back to my son. Because there are things you can explain, and things that explanation will not fix, and my son did not need a letter. What he needed was the slow education of consequences, the same education I had given 30 years of 5th graders, which is this: actions tell the truth about what we value, and eventually the truth becomes the lesson whether we intended it to or not. I did not reply. Instead, I opened a new document, and I started writing down everything I remembered from the week: the gray mare in the shallows, the way the ferry horn sounded against the open water, Ruth's ridiculous card rules, Helen's face in the fairy light, the candles on the porch in the dark, 7 small flames against the Carolina night. I wrote until my coffee went cold. Then I got up and refilled it and sat back down and kept writing, because that week had taught me something I should have known 50 years ago and didn't. Not fully. That the stories we tell about our own lives are the ones we choose to keep telling, and I had spent too long telling myself a story about a woman whose value was measured in her usefulness, whose love was proven by her sacrifice, whose place at the table had to be earned every single time. I was done with that story. The new one started on a ferry in the early morning with 6 women and a wide hat and a photograph of a man I had loved for 30 years, and it went like this. I was never the woman standing outside the door. I was always the one who built the door, and the house around it, and the road that led to it. And when I finally decided to walk away from people who had mistaken my steadiness for submission, I did not walk into nothing. I walked into this. Into coffee going cold while I write what I want to write. Into a cardinal at a feeder my husband built with his hands. Into friendships that ask nothing of me but my presence and give back warmth without conditions. Into the knowledge that I am not here to be useful to people who cannot be bothered to be kind. Into the quiet, hard-earned dignity of a woman who knows exactly what she is worth. If this story found you, I believe it found you for a reason. Maybe you are standing outside a door you helped build, reading a text from someone who has mistaken your generosity for an unlimited account they never have to balance. Maybe you have been the one planning the party and losing the deposit and smiling anyway. Maybe you have a jar somewhere, full of something you have been saving for a family that keeps forgetting to include you. I want you to know something. The jar is yours. The trip is yours. The candle is yours to light, and you do not need their permission to strike the match. This is Spirit Tales, where women who have been written out of other people's stories learn to write their own, where the ones who were left behind find out they were never behind at all. They were just waiting for the right company for the journey. Subscribe and stay a while, because we have so much more to tell, and every word of it is true.